The morning sun beat down on Officer Reynolds as she adjusted her cap and scanned the road from her patrol car. Her coffee had spilled earlier. Her ex had sent another angry text about alimony, and now she was stuck on traffic duty instead of working the case she'd been hoping to close. Not that anyone at the precinct seemed to care about her ambitions. 20 years on the force, and what did she have to show for it? A dingy apartment and a growing resentment that simmered just beneath her badge. Reynolds drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, eyes narrowing as a sleek black BMW approached. Something about luxury cars always got under her skin, especially in this neighborhood. The car wasn't speeding, not technically, but it was moving with a confidence that irritated her. She flipped on her lights and pulled out behind it. The BMW signaled and pulled over smoothly, stopping in a perfect parallel to the curb. Reynolds took her time walking up, watching as the driver's window slid down to reveal a black woman in her 40s, dressed in a tailored navy suit. "License and registration," Reynolds said, not bothering with the usual greeting. Her voice had that clipped edge her last performance review had called concerning when interacting with the public. The woman nodded, reaching carefully toward her glove compartment. "May I ask why I've been stopped, officer?" Her voice was calm, measured, educated. That irritated Reynolds even more. Failure to come to a complete stop at the intersection back there. Reynolds lied. She hadn't seen any such violation, but it was always an easy one to claim. Who really came to a perfect stop anyway? The woman handed over her documents. "I'm certain I did stop completely, officer. I'm actually running late for work, so I've been extra careful this morning." Reynolds glanced at the license. Honorable Vivian Taylor. Address in the expensive part of town. Birth date making her 47 years old. She looked good for her age, Reynolds had to admit, which somehow made her even more annoyed. "Well, Judge Taylor, seems you think the rules don't apply to you." The words slipped out before Reynolds could stop them, her tone dripping with sarcasm on the word judge. Judge Taylor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition perhaps, of a situation she'd seen unfold too many times before. "I don't believe I mentioned my profession, Officer Reynolds," she said, reading the nameplate on Reynolds's uniform. Reynolds felt her face grow hot. "Says right here on your fancy business card that was with your registration." She gestured vaguely toward the papers in her hand. "Think being a judge means you get special treatment? Not with me. I'm not asking for special treatment, just fair treatment." Judge Taylor's voice remained level. "And I'd appreciate if you'd return my documents and issue whatever citation you believe is warranted, so I can get to the courthouse. I have a full docket this morning." Something about the woman's composure made Reynolds' skin prickle. Too many people had looked down on her over the years. Bosses, ex-husbands, even rookie cops with college degrees she couldn't afford. She was tired of it. "Step out of the vehicle, please," Reynolds said. Judge Taylor blinked, genuine surprise crossing her face. "Excuse me? For a rolling stop? Step out of the vehicle now." Reynolds's hand drifted to her belt, not quite touching her taser but making sure the judge saw the movement. Judge Taylor took a deep breath. "Officer Reynolds, I'd like to speak with your supervisor. This stop appears to be escalating unnecessarily and Out! Now!" Reynolds barked, pulling the door open herself. "You don't get to make demands here." The street wasn't busy, but a few morning commuters slowed as they drove past. Across the street, an older man walking his dog had stopped to watch. A teenager waiting at a bus stop had their phone out, pointed in their direction. Judge Taylor unfastened her seatbelt and stepped out with deliberate calmness, her hands visible. She was shorter than Reynolds had expected, the top of her head barely reaching the officer's shoulder, but she stood straight, dignified. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Reynolds ordered. "Officer, this is completely unnecessary. If you believe I committed a traffic violation, are you resisting?" Reynolds stepped closer, invading the judge's personal space. "I am not resisting. I am questioning the basis for—" Reynolds grabbed Judge Taylor's arm, spinning her around and pushing her roughly against the car. The judge's cheek pressed against the roof of her BMW, her papers scattering to the ground. "When an officer gives you an order, you follow it," Reynolds hissed, close to Judge Taylor's ear. "You people always think you know better than us." The words hung in the air between them. Judge Taylor went very still. "You people," she repeated quietly. Reynolds felt a moment of panic. She hadn't meant to say that out loud. Or maybe she had. The line between her private thoughts and public behavior had been blurring lately. Her lieutenant had warned her about it just last month. She loosened her grip slightly but didn't back away. "Don't make this about race. I meant you rich types thinking you're above the law." Judge Taylor didn't respond to that. Instead, she said, "Officer Reynolds, my court ID is in my jacket pocket. I am late for arraignments that begin in 20 minutes. There are people waiting for their day in court. Please allow me to continue to my workplace." Reynolds hesitated. She was suddenly aware of the growing number of onlookers. The teenager at the bus stop was definitely recording now. The old man with the dog had been joined by a woman in scrubs, both watching with concerned expressions. "You trying to intimidate me by dropping your judge title?" Reynolds muttered, but the fire was fading from her voice. Something was telling her to back down, that this had gone too far already. But pride kept her from admitting her mistake. Instead, she patted down Judge Taylor with unnecessary thoroughness, making a show of checking for weapons they both knew weren't there. "Clean record?" Reynolds asked, knowing the answer already. "Yes," Judge Taylor replied simply. Reynolds bent down, gathering the scattered license and registration from the ground. There was no business card among them. Confirming what they both already knew, Reynolds had seen the woman's occupation on her license and used it to make assumptions. "I'm going to let you off with a warning this time," Reynolds said loudly enough for the onlookers to hear, as if she were doing the judge a favor. "But watch those stops in the future." Judge Taylor straightened her jacket and turned to face the officer. For a moment, their eyes met, and Reynolds saw something unexpected there. Not anger or fear, but a deep, evaluating intelligence. This wasn't just any judge, Reynolds realized too late. This was someone who understood power and systems and how they worked. "Your badge number is 4873, correct?" Judge Taylor asked quietly. Reynolds didn't answer, but her hand moved unconsciously to cover the number on her uniform. "That won't be necessary," Judge Taylor said. "I have an excellent memory for details. It's essential in my line of work." She extended her hand for her documents. Reynolds handed them over, suddenly eager to end this encounter. "You can go now." Judge Taylor nodded once, returned to her car, and closed the door. Through the window, Reynolds watched as she took a moment to compose herself, straightening her collar where Reynolds had grabbed her, touching her cheek where it had been pressed against the car. Then she started the engine. As the BMW pulled away, Reynolds noticed that her own hands were shaking. The coffee stain on her uniform seemed more prominent now, her whole appearance more disheveled compared to the judge's composure. The teenager at the bus stop was still recording, and now they were typing something on their phone. Reynolds returned to her patrol car and sat heavily in the driver's seat. She told herself she'd done nothing wrong, just a routine traffic stop that got a little heated. The judge had been disrespectful, challenging her authority. Anyone would have reacted the same way. But as she reached for her radio, she noticed the dash camera's red light blinking. It had captured everything, and Judge Taylor had known it would. Reynolds felt the first flutter of real worry in her stomach. She'd had complaints before, sure, but they'd always been handled quietly. The department looked after its own. But this felt different somehow. She picked up her radio to call in, then set it down again. What would she say? That she'd just harassed a judge on her way to court for no reason other than her own bad mood and prejudices? Her phone buzzed with a text from her lieutenant. "Need you back at the station ASAP." That was fast. Too fast for it to be about what had just happened. Wasn't it? Reynolds started her car, trying to shake off the feeling that something had shifted in her world. It was just a traffic stop, she told herself. She'd done nothing wrong. But as she pulled away from the curb, she couldn't help glancing in her rearview mirror, as if Judge Taylor might still be there watching her. Those intelligent eyes seeing through the armor Reynolds had built around herself over the years. The morning sun that had seemed so harsh earlier now felt exposing. Illuminating parts of herself Reynolds had managed to keep in shadow for a very long time. Officer Reynolds arrived at the station to find an unusual buzz of activity. Desk officers who normally greeted her with lazy waves or tired jokes were huddled around computer screens, their faces tense. One of them, Officer Chen, looked up as she walked in and quickly glanced away. Something was definitely off. "Reynolds." The sharp voice of Lieutenant Garcia cut through the noise. He stood in the doorway of his office, face grim. "My office, now." Reynolds felt a flutter of nerves but pushed it down. She'd been called into the lieutenant's office plenty of times over her career. Usually it blew over. "What's up, boss?" she asked, trying to sound casual as she closed the door behind her. Lieutenant Garcia didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tapped at his keyboard, turning his monitor so Reynolds could see it. On screen was paused security footage from a street camera, showing Reynolds' patrol car pulled up behind Judge Taylor's BMW. "Care to explain what happened this morning?" Garcia asked, his voice unnervingly calm. Reynolds swallowed. "Routine traffic stop. Driver rolled through a stop sign. I gave her a warning and sent her on her way." Garcia nodded slowly, then hit play. The footage was crystal clear, showing the BMW coming to a complete stop at the intersection before proceeding. No violation whatsoever. The camera angle switched to show Reynolds approaching the car, then the confrontation escalating. Though there was no audio, the body language told the story. Reynolds aggressive. The judge composed until being roughly handled against her car. "That's not how I remember it," Reynolds said weakly. Garcia paused the video again. 3 different security cameras, Reynolds, plus 2 bystander videos already uploaded to social media. He turned his screen back around. "And to make matters worse, do you have any idea who you just manhandled?" Reynolds looked at the floor. Judge Taylor, not just any judge. Federal Judge Vivian Taylor, recently appointed, has a reputation for being tough but fair, especially on civil rights cases. Garcia leaned forward, and she just called the chief directly from her chambers. Reynolds felt the blood drain from her face. You didn't what? Didn't know she was a federal judge? Would it have made a difference if she was a teacher? A nurse, some kid working at a fast food joint? Garcia's voice rose slightly before he got it under control again. "Her occupation isn't the point, Reynolds. Your behavior is." Outside the office, Reynolds could see more officers gathering around computers. One pointed at a screen, shaking his head. "Am I being suspended?" Reynolds asked, her mouth dry. "Judge Taylor has filed a formal complaint. She submitted the security footage, her own statement, and..." Garcia checked his notes. Statements from 3 witnesses who saw the whole thing, including timestamps and badge numbers. He looked up. "She's methodical, I'll give her that." Reynolds tried to find her usual indignation, the defensive anger that had carried her through previous complaints, but it wouldn't come. The evidence was too clear this time. "Internal Affairs will be conducting a full investigation," Garcia continued. "Until then, you're on administrative duty. No patrol, no public contact. Administrative duty? You're sticking me at a desk because some judge got her feelings hurt over a traffic stop?" There it was, the familiar heat of resentment. Garcia's expression hardened. "This isn't just about today, Reynolds. Judge Taylor's complaint prompted them to pull your record. All of it, including the sealed parts." Reynolds felt a chill. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means they're looking at every complaint ever filed against you." "The patterns, Reynolds. The similarities." Garcia looked tired suddenly. "You've been transferred 3 times in 20 years. Did you think nobody would ever connect the dots?" Outside, Officer Chen was now on the phone, looking through the glass at Reynolds with an unreadable expression. Reynolds turned away. "This is a witch hunt," she muttered. "No, Reynolds. This is accountability." Garcia handed her a folder. "Report to records. You'll be digitizing old case files until further notice. Badge and gun stay here." Judge Taylor sat in her chambers, fingertips pressed together as she stared at the framed photo on her desk, herself as a young law student, arm around her father who wore his postal worker uniform with pride. He'd taught her to stand tall, to work twice as hard, and most importantly, to use the system to change the system. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, straightening her collar to hide the faint bruise forming where Officer Reynolds had grabbed her. Her clerk, a bright-eyed young man named Thomas, entered with a stack of files. "Your 2 o'clock is ready, Your Honor, but I can tell them you need more time if—" "No need," Judge Taylor said, rising. "The docket doesn't stop for personal matters." Thomas hesitated. "Everyone's talking about what happened this morning. It's already online. The videos, I mean." Judge Taylor nodded. "I'm aware. Are you okay?" "Really okay?" She appreciated his concern but maintained her professional demeanor. "I've filed the appropriate complaints through the proper channels. Thomas, the system will work as it should, or it would, if she had anything to say about it." "The chief of police called while you were in court," Thomas added. "Twice. And there's a reporter from the Tribune who wants a statement." Judge Taylor checked her watch. "Tell the reporter no comment at this time." As for the chief, I'll call him back after my 4 o'clock. She picked up her robe from the coat rack. Justice doesn't wait, even on difficult days. By evening, Reynolds sat alone in the records room, surrounded by dusty files that needed scanning. Her phone had been buzzing with text from fellow officers all day, some supportive, others conspicuously silent. Her union rep had called, voice tense, saying they needed to talk strategy. The department TV in the corner was tuned to the local news. Reynolds had been half listening until she heard the anchor's words. Confrontation between a police officer and a federal judge that has the city talking tonight. Reynolds's head snapped up as security footage appeared on screen, showing her traffic stop that morning. The anchor's voice continued over the silent video. Federal Judge Vivian Taylor was reportedly on her way to court when Officer Diane Reynolds pulled her over for what the department now confirms was an unfounded traffic violation. The footage cut to show Reynolds pushing the judge against the car. Sources tell us this isn't the first complaint against Officer Reynolds, who has been the subject of multiple internal investigations throughout her career. The screen split to show a reporter standing outside the courthouse, while Judge Taylor has declined to comment, citing the ongoing investigation. Community activists are already calling this another example of racial profiling by the city's police department. The camera panned to show a small group of protesters gathering on the courthouse steps, holding signs reading "Justice for Who" and "Accountability Now." Reynolds fumbled for the remote, turning off the TV. The silence in the records room felt deafening. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her daughter. "Mom, are you okay? My friends are sending me links to videos of you." Reynolds put the phone down without answering. What could she possibly say? Judge Taylor drove home in the soft evening light, her BMW now feeling like a target rather than a symbol of her hard-earned success. As she waited at a red light, coming to a complete stop, of course, she noticed a patrol car in her rearview mirror and felt a momentary tension before recognizing it as an automatic response to trauma. "Not today," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath. Her phone rang through the car's speakers. It was her brother. "Viv," he said when she answered. "You all right?" "I saw the news." "I'm fine, Anthony," she said, though the ache in her shoulder suggested otherwise. "Fine? That cop threw you against your car. For nothing," Judge Taylor sighed. "And now there's a process. A proper investigation. The same kind of proper investigation that cleared the officer who pulled a gun on me last year for fitting a description." Anthony's voice was bitter. "This time will be different," she said, pulling into her driveway. "Because you're a judge? That's the point, Viv. What about all the people who don't have your credentials? Your connections?" His words hit home as they always did. Anthony had always been her conscience, pushing her to remember where they came from. "I know," she said quietly. "That's why this can't just be about me." She ended the call and sat in her car for a moment thinking. What had happened to her was wrong, but it wasn't unique. The difference was that she had the power to do something about it, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd faced the same treatment without her platform. Judge Taylor picked up her phone again and made a call. "District Attorney Wilson?" "It's Judge Taylor. About this morning's incident. I've been thinking, this needs to be more than just an individual complaint. It needs to be a catalyst for change." As she outlined her thoughts, Judge Taylor watched the sun set over her neighborhood. Officer Reynolds had built an empire of impunity over 20 years, protected by a system designed to shield its own. But empires could fall quickly when their foundations were exposed, and Judge Taylor had just begun digging. 3 days after the incident, Reynolds sat alone in the back corner of Lou's Diner, a greasy spoon 2 miles from the station where cops rarely went. She stirred her cold coffee absently, watching raindrops race down the window beside her booth. Her phone lay face down on the table, silent for the first time in days. She'd stopped checking the messages, stopped scrolling through social media where her name and face seemed to be everywhere. A newspaper someone had left behind on the next table caught her eye. Her own scowling face stared back from page 3, a still from the body camera footage that had been released yesterday. The headline read, "Officer's History Reveals Pattern of Complaints." Reynolds looked away, but not before catching a few lines of the article. 17 formal complaints over a 20-year career, with 12 coming from people of color. "More coffee, hun?" The waitress appeared with a pot, her expression neutral. Reynolds wondered if she recognized her from the news. No, thanks. Just the check. As the waitress walked away, the bell above the diner door jingled. Reynolds glanced up and froze. Officer Chen from the precinct walked in, shaking rain from his jacket. He scanned the diner, spotted Reynolds, and after a moment's hesitation, walked toward her table. "Thought I might find you here," he said. Reynolds didn't respond, just watched as Chen slid into the booth across from her. "You're not answering your phone," he said. "Nothing worth hearing," Reynolds replied. Chen sighed. "The union lawyer's been trying to reach you. You've got a meeting with Internal Affairs tomorrow morning." "I know. And you need to prepare. This isn't going away, Reynolds. The chief is under pressure from the mayor, the press, community groups, and Judge Taylor," Reynolds cut in. "Don't forget her," Chen leaned forward. "That's what I came to tell you. Judge Taylor isn't just filing a personal complaint. She's working with the district attorney's office to launch a broader investigation into departmental practices." Reynolds felt a chill. "What does that mean?" "It means they're pulling cases. Lots of them. Every arrest you've made in the last 5 years, for starters. Every complaint, every use of force report." Chen lowered his voice. "And they're looking at supervisors, too. How complaints were handled, who signed off on what." Reynolds thought of all the lieutenants and captains who'd covered for her over the years, filed away complaints, looked the other way. People who'd told her not to worry, that it would blow over. "They can't do that based on one traffic stop," she said. But her voice lacked conviction. Chen gave her a level look. "It's not just about the traffic stop anymore. Judge Taylor is using her influence to push for a systemic review. And here's the thing, she's got support. Not just from the usual activists, but from inside the department, too." Reynolds stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there are officers who have been waiting for a chance to clean house, who've been uncomfortable with certain practices for a long time." "Officers like you?" Reynolds asked bitterly. Chen didn't flinch. "Yes, like me." "And more than you think." The waitress returned with Reynolds' check, eyeing them both before walking away. "So you're all just throwing me under the bus," Reynolds said, reaching for her wallet. "No, you drove the bus off the cliff yourself." Chen stood up. "The lawyer will meet you at your place at 7 tomorrow. Try to answer your phone." As he turned to leave, Reynolds called after him. "Why do you even care?" Chen paused. "Because when this is over, some of us will still be wearing the badge. And I want it to mean something better than it does now." After he left, Reynolds sat for a long time, the untouched check on the table in front of her, watching the rain wash the world clean outside the window. Judge Taylor's chambers had become a hub of activity. What had begun as a personal complaint had evolved into something much larger. On her desk lay stacks of case files, dozens of complaints against Officer Reynolds over the years, each one telling a similar story. A knock at her door interrupted her reading. Her clerk, Thomas, entered with District Attorney Wilson, a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s with keen eyes and a reputation for political ambition. "Judge Taylor," Wilson greeted her. "I've brought the preliminary findings you requested." Judge Taylor gestured to the chairs in front of her desk. "Please sit. Tell me what you found." Wilson opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. "It's worse than we thought. Officer Reynolds has a clear pattern of targeting minorities for traffic stops, 3 times the rate of other officers in her precinct. But here's where it gets interesting. We found at least 7 supervisors who systematically buried complaints against her, and several other officers with similar patterns." 7? Judge Taylor raised an eyebrow. "Across 3 precincts. When complaints would pile up in one location, Reynolds would be transferred to another. Clean slate, same behavior, different supervisors looking the other way." Tomas, who had been taking notes, looked up. "That suggests coordination at a higher level." Wilson nodded. "Exactly. We're looking at a potential conspiracy to conceal civil rights violations, and the pattern extends beyond Reynolds. We've identified 4 other officers with similar complaint histories and transfer patterns." Judge Taylor leaned back in her chair, taking this in. What had started as one officer's bigoted behavior was revealing itself to be something much more pervasive. "The media's running with this," Tomas said. "I've counted 15 articles since yesterday, 3 national outlets picking up the story." "And the police union?" Judge Taylor asked. Wilson grimaced. "Circling the wagons as expected. They've issued a statement about rush to judgment and officers' right to due process. They're right about due process, Judge Taylor said firmly. Everything by the book. No shortcuts, no matter how tempting. Even with what happened to you? Wilson asked. Judge Taylor touched her shoulder unconsciously, where the bruise had deepened to a purple stain. Especially because of what happened to me. This needs to be airtight, Wilson nodded, then hesitated. There's something else. We've received calls from dozens of people claiming similar experiences with Reynolds and other officers. Most never filed formal complaints. Why not? The usual reasons. Fear of retaliation, past complaints being ignored, not knowing the process. Wilson pulled out another document. But this one's different. A man named Terrell Washington was arrested by Reynolds 3 years ago, charged with resisting arrest after a traffic stop. He spent 8 months in jail before the charges were dismissed for lack of evidence. Judge Taylor took the file, scanning it quickly. Any witnesses? Security camera from a nearby business, just like in your case. But the footage mysteriously disappeared from evidence before trial. Wilson's expression was grim. Washington filed a formal complaint about the missing evidence. Guess who was in charge of the internal investigation? One of the 7 supervisors, Judge Taylor guessed. Lieutenant Phillips. He concluded there was no evidence of misconduct. Judge Taylor closed the file, her mind racing. We need to find that footage. After 3 years? Wilson looked skeptical. Security companies often keep backups, and the business owner might have their own copy. Judge Taylor stood up. This isn't just about Reynolds anymore. This is about a system that protected her and others like her, at the expense of people like Terrell Washington. As Wilson gathered her papers to leave, she paused. You know, taking this route will make you enemies. Powerful ones. Judge Taylor looked at the photo of her father on her desk. My father used to say that justice isn't about being liked. It's about being right. After Wilson left, Tomas lingered. The chief of police has requested a private meeting with you. Judge Taylor considered this. Set it up. But here, not at the station. And Tomas, record every meeting from now on. Document everything. Tomas nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. Judge, there's a crowd gathering outside the courthouse. Protesters, but peaceful ones. They're calling for police reform, carrying signs with your name on them. Judge Taylor walked to her window. 3 floors below, a diverse group of people stood in the rain, holding signs and chanting. A news van was parked nearby, a reporter doing a live stand-up with the crowd as backdrop. One sign in particular caught her eye. If they did this to a judge, what are they doing to U.S.? It was a fair question, one she intended to answer. Officer Reynolds' apartment was a mess of takeout containers and unwashed clothes. She hadn't bothered cleaning since being placed on administrative duty. The TV droned in the background, some reality show she wasn't really watching, as she sorted through old photos spread across her coffee table. 20 years of police work laid out in fading snapshots. Her academy graduation, her first day on patrol, award ceremonies and department picnics. In the earlier photos she was smiling, proud, standing tall in her crisp uniform. When had that changed? When had the pride curdled into something harder, colder? A news alert on her phone interrupted her thoughts. She picked it up to see a breaking news banner. Police chief announces independent review of department practices following Judge Taylor incident. Reynolds clicked on the video. The chief stood at a podium, flanked by the mayor and several community leaders. The incident involving Judge Taylor has brought to light concerns about broader patterns within our department, the chief was saying, his expression grave. Today I am announcing the formation of an independent review board that will examine our policies, training, and complaint procedures. This board will include community members, legal experts, and law enforcement professionals from outside our department. The camera panned to show Judge Taylor standing to the side, her face composed as always. Next to her was a middle-aged black man Reynolds didn't recognize until the caption appeared. Terrell Washington, former defendant in case under review. Reynolds felt the floor drop out from under her. She knew that name, that case. The missing footage that Lieutenant Phillips had helped her handle. Her phone rang, her union lawyer no doubt calling about tomorrow's meeting. Reynolds ignored it, still watching the press conference. The chief was still speaking. I want to be clear. The vast majority of our officers serve with honor and integrity every day. But we cannot ignore evidence that suggests systemic problems within our ranks. We owe it to our officers and to our community to address these issues head-on. Reynolds turned off the TV and looked again at the photos spread before her. The smiling young officer in her graduation picture stared back, full of hope and purpose. "What happened to you?" Reynolds whispered to her younger self. Outside, rain continued to fall, washing away old certainties, revealing truths long buried beneath the surface of things. Officer Reynolds's empire, built on protection from above and silence from below, was crumbling faster than anyone could have predicted. And somewhere across town, Judge Taylor was just getting started. 2 weeks later, the city was still buzzing with developments. In what the media had dubbed the Judge Taylor case, what had begun as a traffic stop had ballooned into the biggest police scandal the city had seen in decades. Reynolds sat in a stiff chair, outside the Internal Affairs interview room, waiting to be called in for her third session. The first two had been grueling, 5 hours each of detailed questions about specific incidents, complaints, and her relationships with supervising officers. Today promised more of the same. Down the hall, she could see Lieutenant Phillips pacing, his phone pressed to his ear. He had been called in yesterday. The bags under his eyes suggested it hadn't gone well. Officer Reynolds, a stern-faced IA investigator, appeared at the door. "We're ready for you now." Reynolds stood, smoothing her civilian clothes. No uniform during administrative leave, another small humiliation in a growing list. The interview room was cold and sterile, with recording equipment set up at one end of the table. 2 investigators sat waiting along with someone new, a black woman in a sharp suit who Reynolds didn't recognize. "This is Deputy Attorney General Nichols," one of the investigators explained. "She's joining us from the State AG's office, which is now overseeing certain aspects of this investigation." Reynolds felt her mouth go dry. The State Attorney General's involvement meant this had escalated beyond a departmental matter. This was now criminal. "Officer Reynolds," Nichols began, her voice calm but firm, "I'd like to discuss the Terrell Washington case." Reynolds glanced at her union lawyer, who gave a slight nod. "I arrested Washington during a traffic stop in 2020, Reynolds said carefully. "He resisted arrest and—" "Let me stop you there," Nichols interrupted, opening a folder. "We've recovered the security footage from that incident." Reynolds felt the blood drain from her face. "It seems the owner of the convenience store kept his own backup," Nichols continued. "Interestingly, it shows a very different sequence of events than what you described in your report." She slid a still image across the table. It showed Reynolds with her knee on Washington's back as he lay face down on the pavement, his hands clearly extended in a surrendering position. "Care to explain the discrepancy?" Reynolds looked at her lawyer again, who was now scribbling furiously on a notepad. "I'd like to consult with my attorney," Reynolds said. Nichols nodded. "Of course. But I should mention that we've also spoken with Lieutenant Phillips. He's been very cooperative." The implication was clear. Phillips had flipped. As Reynolds and her lawyer stepped into the hallway, she felt the walls of her career closing in. Phillips had been her protector for years, burying complaints, losing evidence, coaching her on reports. If he was cooperating with the investigation, she was finished. "They're building a criminal case," her lawyer said quietly. "Obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, civil rights violations. They'll offer Phillips a deal to testify against you and the others." "What others?" Reynolds asked. Her lawyer looked grim. "This isn't just about you anymore. They're going after the whole chain of command that enabled this behavior." Reynolds leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "What are my options?" "Cooperate. Tell them everything. Who told you to target certain neighborhoods, who coached you on writing reports, who helped make evidence disappear?" The lawyer's voice was matter-of-fact. "Or fight it and likely lose." Reynolds thought about all the officers who had turned their backs on her these past weeks. The supervisors who had once promised to protect her now scrambling to save themselves. "I need to think," she said. Judge Taylor sat in the chief of police's office, listening as he outlined the changes already underway in the department. "We've placed 4 additional officers on administrative leave pending investigation," the chief said. "We're reviewing all use of force incidents from the past 5 years. And we've appointed an independent civilian oversight committee with actual disciplinary power." Judge Taylor nodded. "These are positive steps, Chief Davis, but they're just the beginning." The chief sighed, looking suddenly older than his 50 years. "I know. The State AG's office is talking criminal charges for some officers. And the Justice Department has opened a pattern or practice investigation, which would never have happened if you'd addressed these issues when they first appeared," Judge Taylor said evenly. The chief didn't dispute this. "I inherited some of these problems, but I won't pretend I didn't see what was happening. I convinced myself that a few bad apples weren't worth upsetting the whole department." "Bad apples spoil the bunch," Judge Taylor replied. "That's how the saying actually goes." A knock at the door interrupted them. The chief's assistant entered, looking anxious. "Sir, there's a situation developing outside. A group of officers' wives and families are holding a press conference defending the suspended officers. They're claiming this is all politically motivated." The chief rubbed his temples. "Of course they are," Judge Taylor stood. "I should go. I have court in an hour." As she gathered her things, the chief asked, "Do you think we can fix this?" "Really fix it?" Judge Taylor considered her answer carefully. "That depends on whether you see this moment as a crisis to manage or an opportunity to transform. Reynolds and her enablers are symptoms of a deeper problem. Removing them won't cure the disease." The chief nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened to you." "Don't be sorry for me," Judge Taylor said. "Be sorry for all the people who experienced the same thing without my platform or privileges. They're the ones who deserve your apology and your action." Outside the police headquarters, a crowd had gathered. On one side, families of police officers held signs reading, "Support our police" and "Due process matters." On the other, community activists and citizens called for accountability with signs like "Justice for all" and "Reform now." Between them stood a line of uniformed officers, looking uncomfortable as they kept the peace between the two groups. Among the protesters was Terrell Washington, now a reluctant symbol of the movement for police reform. News cameras followed him as he spoke to fellow activists, his face serious but determined. "For 3 years I told anyone who would listen what happened to me," he told a reporter. "Nobody believed me. It took a judge getting the same treatment for people to finally listen." "And how do you feel about that?" the reporter asked. Washington considered his answer. "I'm glad people are listening now, but I wish they'd listened before. How many of us have to be hurt before people believe there's a problem?" Across the plaza, Reynolds' sister Karen stood with the police supporters, holding a sign that read, "Hear all sides." She had been struggling with conflicting emotions since the scandal broke: love for her sister, battling with dismay at what she'd allegedly done. Community activist approached her, a black woman about her age. "Your sign," the woman said. "Hear all sides." "Does that include Terrell Washington's side? And all the others who filed complaints?" Karen swallowed hard. "My sister is a good person who made some mistakes. She doesn't deserve to have her whole career erased. And Washington didn't deserve 8 months in jail for a crime he didn't commit," the woman replied. "But here we are." They looked at each other across what seemed like an unbridgeable divide. Two women caught in a conflict neither had created. "I just want things to be fair," Karen said finally. "So do we," the woman answered. "That's all we've ever wanted." As evening fell, Reynolds sat alone on a bench in the city park, watching families pack up after a day of picnics and play. Her phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. DA's office called. "They want to talk deal. Call me." Reynolds put the phone away without responding. She needed time to think. A passing jogger slowed, giving her a second look. Reynolds tensed, wondering if she'd been recognized from the news. But the jogger just nodded politely and continued on. How many people had she stopped over the years who had done nothing wrong? How many had felt that same tension, that fear, just because of who they were or how they looked? For the first time, Reynolds allowed herself to truly consider the harm she might have caused. Across the park, she spotted a familiar figure walking alone. Judge Taylor, still in her work clothes, apparently taking a moment of peace after a long day. Reynolds felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anger, shame, fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. Before she could think better of it, she stood and walked toward the judge. Judge Taylor noticed her approach and paused, her expression guarded but not hostile. "Officer Reynolds," she acknowledged when Reynolds reached her. "This is unexpected." Reynolds took a deep breath. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I wanted to say something." Judge Taylor waited, perfectly still, neither encouraging nor discouraging. "I've been thinking a lot about that morning," Reynolds began, her voice unsteady. "About all of it. The traffic stop. What I said. What I did? And? Judge Taylor's voice was neutral. Reynolds struggled to find the right words. I told myself a story about who you were before I ever met you. Before I ever saw your face, I made up my mind about you based on nothing, just your car, the color of your skin. She forced herself to meet Judge Taylor's eyes. I was wrong. Judge Taylor studied her for a long moment. Yes, you were. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know there are consequences I have to face. Reynolds looked down at her hands. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. What I did, who I've been. Judge Taylor adjusted her bag on her shoulder. Acknowledgement is a first step, Officer Reynolds. But only a first step. I know. What will your second step be? Reynolds hadn't expected this question. I don't know. Cooperate with the investigation, I guess. Tell the truth, Judge Taylor nodded. The truth is important. But so is action. So is change. As twilight deepened around them, the two women stood facing each other. A judge and an officer, a victim and a perpetrator. Two humans caught in a system that had failed them both in different ways. I have to go, Judge Taylor said finally. My brother is expecting me for dinner. Reynolds nodded. Thank you for listening. As Judge Taylor walked away, Reynolds called after her. Do you think things will really change? The department, I mean. The system. Judge Taylor turned back. That depends. On what? On whether enough people like you, Officer Reynolds, are finally willing to tell the truth about what's broken. Judge Taylor's voice was firm, but not unkind. And then do the hard work of fixing it. With that, she continued on her way, leaving Reynolds standing alone in the gathering darkness, facing a future far different from the one she had imagined for herself just weeks before. The empire she had built on silence and protection had crumbled. Now she had to decide what, if anything, she would build in its place. 1 year later, the city looked much the same on the surface. Traffic still clogged downtown streets during rush hour. People still hurried along sidewalks with coffee cups and phone conversations. Parks still filled with families on sunny weekends. But beneath this familiar rhythm, things had changed. Reynolds sat at a small table in the courthouse cafeteria, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. She wore civilian clothes, a simple blouse and slacks, having turned in her uniform for good 6 months ago as part of her plea agreement. No jail time, but her badge and career were gone forever. She checked her watch. The hearing would start in 20 minutes. Her testimony was scheduled for the afternoon, but she wanted to be present for the whole thing. She owed at least that much. Mind if I join you? Reynolds looked up to see Officer Chen, now Sergeant Chen, following the departmental shakeup, standing with a tray of food. Free country, Reynolds replied, gesturing to the empty chair. Chen sat down. Didn't expect to see you here before your testimony. Didn't have anywhere else to be. Reynolds stirred her coffee. It was true. Since leaving the force, her days had stretched empty before her. Former colleagues avoided her. Friends had drifted away. Her sister Karen still called, but conversations were strained. How's the new job? Chen asked. Reynolds shrugged. It's work. She'd found a position as a security consultant for a private firm. The pay was decent, but it wasn't the same. Nothing would ever be the same. The department's different now, Chen said after a moment. The new policies, the oversight board, the training. It's making a difference. Reynolds looked at him. You still got a long way to go. I know. But it's a start. Chen pushed his tray aside. I'm testifying too, you know. About the old culture. The things we all saw and didn't speak up about. Good. Reynolds meant it. She had spent the past year coming to terms with her role in a system that had enabled her worst instincts, while silencing her better ones. You did the right thing, Chen said. Cooperating. Telling the truth about Phillips and the others. Reynolds almost laughed. Let's not make me out to be some kind of hero. I didn't have much choice. There's always a choice. Look at Phillips, still denying everything, throwing everyone else under the bus. Chen shook his head. At least you owned what you did. Reynolds didn't respond. Owning what she'd done was the minimum. It didn't erase the harm, didn't make up for years of abusing her power. I should head upstairs, she said, gathering her things. Reynolds, Chen called as she stood to leave. For what it's worth, a lot of us respect how you've handled this. It would have been easier to just disappear. She nodded once, then headed for the elevators, Chen's words echoing uncomfortably. She wasn't looking for respect or redemption. She just wanted to see this through to the end. Judge Taylor adjusted her robes in her chambers, preparing for what promised to be a historic day in court. The case against the former police leadership had been building for months, a complex web of civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice charges that implicated not just individual officers but the system itself. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. District Attorney Wilson entered, followed by Terrell Washington, now working with the newly formed Civilian Oversight Board. "They're ready whenever you are." "Your Honor," Wilson said. Judge Taylor nodded. "How many former officers are testifying today?" "3, Washington answered. "Including Reynolds." Judge Taylor kept her expression neutral. She hadn't seen Reynolds since their encounter in the park a year ago. That conversation had surprised her, not just Reynolds' admission of wrongdoing, but her own willingness to listen. "The courtroom's packed," Wilson added. "Media, community members, police reform advocates. Even the mayor's there." "This isn't a performance," Judge Taylor reminded them. "It's justice." "It can be both," Washington said quietly. "People need to see this, to believe change is possible." Judge Taylor understood. For too long, incidents like what happened to her in Washington had been hidden away, resolved behind closed doors if addressed at all. Public accountability was part of the healing process, for individuals and for the community. "Let's not keep them waiting," she said. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Taylor entered. Reynolds watched from her seat in the witness waiting area, struck by the judge's calm authority. How different from that morning a year ago, when Reynolds had seen only what she wanted to see, a target for her frustration and prejudice, not a human being deserving of dignity and respect. The hearing began with opening statements, followed by testimony from former Chief Davis about the culture of silence he had allowed to flourish under his watch. He spoke of looking the other way when certain officers racked up complaints, of unwritten policies that targeted specific neighborhoods, of performance metrics that rewarded aggressive policing without accountability. Next came Phillips, defiant even now, insisting he'd only followed orders from above while doing his best to manage problem officers like Reynolds. His testimony rang hollow in the quiet courtroom, his attempts to shift blame transparent to everyone present. Throughout the morning, Reynolds listened as her former department was laid bare, its failings exposed for all to see. It was painful but necessary, like lancing a wound to allow healing to begin. After lunch, it was her turn. As Reynolds took the stand and was sworn in, she looked out at the crowded courtroom. In the gallery sat her sister Karen, her expression a mix of sadness and support. Nearby was Officer Chen with several other officers who had chosen to stand on the side of reform. And scattered throughout were faces she recognized from her years on patrol, people she had stopped, questioned, and too often mistreated simply because of how they looked or where they lived. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor began. "Diane Reynolds, former police officer with the city department." "Ms. Reynolds, you've agreed to testify today as part of your plea agreement, is that correct?" "Yes, but I would have testified anyway," Reynolds said, surprising herself with the admission. This needs to be said. For the next hour, Reynolds walked through her history on the force, the unofficial training she'd received from senior officers about which neighborhoods to target, how certain complaints could be written up to justify stops and searches, which supervisors would help clean up problematic arrests. She spoke of her own biases, how they had been not just tolerated but encouraged within a system designed to protect officers, like her, while failing the communities they were meant to serve. "And on the morning you—" "Stop, Judge Taylor," the prosecutor asked. "What made you decide to pull her over?" Reynolds took a deep breath. "There was no traffic violation. I saw a black woman driving an expensive car and I made assumptions. The same assumptions I'd been making for years without anyone stopping me." The courtroom was completely silent now. "Those assumptions were wrong," Reynolds continued. "Not just morally wrong, but factually wrong. And they led me to abuse my authority, that day and many days before it." As her testimony concluded, Reynolds felt a strange sense of lightness. Not forgiveness, she didn't deserve that yet, but perhaps the first step toward something better than the person she had been. After the hearing, Judge Taylor sat alone in her chambers, reflecting on the day's testimonies. The case would continue for weeks, with more officers coming forward, more evidence of systemic failures being presented, But today had been a turning point, the first time the public had heard the full truth about what had been happening in their police department for decades. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "The press is asking for a statement, Your Honor," her clerk said. Judge Taylor shook her head. "Not today. Today I just want to sit with this." After her clerk left, Judge Taylor opened her desk drawer and took out a small photo, herself as a young girl sitting on her father's shoulders at a civil rights march. He had always told her that change happened in small steps, often painful ones, but that each step mattered. Today had been such a step. As evening settled over the city, Reynolds walked alone through the same park where she had spoken with Judge Taylor a year earlier. The criminal case was proceeding, departmental reforms were underway, and a class action lawsuit on behalf of those wronged by the department's practices was moving through the courts. It wasn't enough. Nothing could fully repair the damage done, but it was something. A beginning. Reynolds spotted a familiar figure ahead on the path. Terrell Washington, the man whose case had helped break open the investigation, whose life had been derailed by her actions and the corrupt system that protected her. For a moment, she considered turning away. What could she possibly say to him? But Washington had already seen her. He stopped waiting as she approached. "Mr. Washington," she said, her voice unsteady. "Ms. Reynolds," he acknowledged. An awkward silence stretched between them. "Your testimony today," Washington finally said. "It couldn't have been easy." Reynolds shook her head. "Nothing compared to what you went through." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." Another silence, less tense than the first. "I'm working with youth now," Washington said, talking to them about their rights during police encounters, and talking to cadets at the academy about seeing the humanity in every person they meet. Reynolds nodded. "That's good work." "It's necessary work." Washington studied her. "What about you? What comes next?" Reynolds hadn't thought much beyond getting through the trial. "I don't know yet, but I want it to matter. I want to help fix what I helped break." Washington considered this. "There's a community dialogue session next week. Department representatives, community members, talking about the path forward. Might be a place to start." It wasn't forgiveness. They both knew that would be too simple, too easy. But it was an opening, a possibility. "I'll be there," Reynolds said. As they parted ways, the park around them continued its everyday rhythms. Children playing, couples walking, life moving forward. The empire of silence and protection that had allowed injustice to flourish had crumbled, making space for something new to grow in its place. It wasn't a happy ending. Those only exist in stories. It was something more important, a new beginning built on truth and the hard work of change. And for now, that was enough.